She doesn't belong here. The voice boomed across the military base. Loud, confident, absolute. Captain Marcus Thorne, a mountain of muscle and ego, stood towering over the small figure in the corner. She was 65 years old, gray-haired, barely 5 feet tall, wearing plain fatigues with no rank insignia. "This is a war zone, not a retirement home," he sneered, his laughter echoing through the mess tent. "Get off my base. Now!" She didn't argue. She simply stood, nodded once, and walked out into the desert heat. 7 minutes later, every system on the base catastrophically failed. Lights died. Communications went dark. Wounded soldiers began coding. Panic erupted. And in that moment of chaos, they realized they just expelled the only person who could save them. What happened next will leave you speechless. Watch the full story here. Subscribe to USX Stories for more tales of quiet heroes. The air in the mess tent at Forward Operating Base Dagger was a thick, physical thing. It smelled of scorched earth, diesel fumes, stale coffee, and the faint metallic tang of nervous sweat. Fluorescent lights hummed their weary, constant tune, casting a sterile greenish glow on the faces of Marines gathered within. They were ghosts in camouflage, their motions tired but sharp, honed by routine and the ever-present low-grade hum of existential threat that permeated beyond the razor wire perimeter and the sun-baked dust. The heat was a predator, relentless and suffocating, pressing into the canvas walls, making every breath a conscious effort. It was a place stripped bare of all but function, a testament to humanity's stubborn ability to carve out a pocket of order in the heart of chaos. At the center of this pocket, holding court from a makeshift throne of stacked pelican cases, was Captain Marcus Thorne. He was a man built like a battering ram, with a jaw that seemed carved from granite and a neck thick enough to stop a bullet. His uniform was crisp, his sleeves rolled with precision that bordered on fanatical, showcasing forearms like bundled cables. At 42, Thorne was in his prime, or so he believed. He was the roaring bonfire in the center of the room, drawing all the lesser flames toward him. His laughter was a percussive blast, his gestures broad and theatrical. He was performing the role of Marine captain, and he never broke character. Around him sat his lieutenants and senior NCOs, a constellation of lesser bodies orbiting his gravitational pull, their faces upturned, reflecting his light. "Look at her," Thorne continued, gesturing with a dismissive flick of his chin toward the far corner of the tent. His voice sliced through the low murmur conversation, imposing an immediate, expectant silence. Every eye in the mess tent swiveled, following his command. Just sitting there, says nothing, does nothing. What use is that? What value does that bring to the fight? In the corner, at a small solitary table, sat the subject of his scorn. Specialist Ana Sharma was a pocket of silence in the cacophony. She was a shard of obsidian in a room full of sun-bleached sand. Her build was slight, almost delicate, and it was swallowed by the sterile gray fatigue she wore. The uniform was devoid of any rank, any unit patch, any name tape. It was utterly anonymous, a blank slate, but it was her age that made her presence so jarring, so seemingly out of place. At 65 years old, Ana Sharma's face told a story of decades. Her skin was weathered but smooth, creased with fine lines that spoke of years spent in thought rather than in the sun. Her hair, once jet black, was now silver white, pulled back in severe, functional bun. Reading glasses hung from a chain around her neck. Her hands, resting on her knees, showed the age spots and prominent veins of a woman in her 7th decade. Yet her posture was perfect, ramrod straight, utterly still. She was not eating. She was not reading. She was simply existing. Her stillness was absolute, a thing so profound it was unnerving. It was not the stillness of rest, but the coiled stillness of a predator, of a high-tension spring, of a system at idle, waiting for a command. Her eyes, the color of dark wet slate, remained fixed on the canvas wall opposite her. Behind those eyes, invisible to everyone in the room, was a mind that had seen the evolution of computing from punch cards to quantum processors, that had built systems for 3 different generations of military infrastructure, that had forgotten more about network architecture than most people would ever learn. Lieutenant David Chun, fresh from Quantico and still radiating the earnest glow of the uninitiated, watched the scene unfold. He was 24, part of Thorne's circle, though he remained on its outer edge, more observer than participant. He found Captain Thorne impressive, a personification of the martial confidence he aspired to. Yet he also felt a strange, inexplicable pull toward the silent woman in the corner. The contrast was stark. Thorne's aggressive youth and vitality versus this elderly woman's profound, unnerving calm. He had seen her arrive 2 days prior, a quiet shadow disembarking from a nondescript transport. No one knew her purpose. The rumor mill, usually a Category 5 hurricane of speculation, was strangely quiet about her. She was a ghost, a question mark. The official explanation was that she was a systems analyst sent from a higher command to conduct a diagnostic audit. It was a vague bureaucratic term that explained nothing. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that Specialist Ana Sharma was a living legend in circles so classified they didn't have names. She was Systemic Correction Unit 7, one of only 12 such operatives in existence. She had been doing this work since before most of these Marines were born. Thorne saw her stillness not as discipline, but as a vacuum, and like all loud, empty things, he felt an overwhelming need to fill it with his own noise. "Hey, Analyst," he shouted, the word dripping with condescension. "You run your little diagnostic yet? Find any scary numbers in our computers?" A few of his sycophants chuckled, the sound forced and eager. Sharma did not react. Her head did not turn. Her gaze, which was fixed on a canvas wall opposite her, did not flicker. It was as if he hadn't spoken, as if his voice was a frequency she simply could not register. This, more than any retort, was an act of profound insubordination to a man like Thorne. His authority was built on the foundation of being acknowledged, of being seen and heard. Her utter disregard for his presence was a direct assault on the very core of his identity. His face darkened, the performative good humor evaporating like sweat in the desert sun. He stood up, the scrape of the pelican case against the plywood floor a harsh, grating sound. He strode across the tent, his boots thudding with deliberate, menacing weight. The entire room held its breath. This was a dominance display, ancient and ritualistic. The pack leader moving to discipline, an anomaly. He stopped in front of her table, looming over her. The physical contrast was stark and almost comical. He was a mountain of muscle and aggression, 42 years of testosterone and ego. She was a still, placid lake at its base, a 65-year-old woman who weighed maybe 110 pounds, soaking wet. "I'm speaking to you, Specialist," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He leaned forward, placing his meaty hands on her small table, his knuckles white. The metal legs of the table groaned under the strain. "When an officer speaks to you on this base, you respond. Do you understand me?" For the first time, she moved. It was not a flinch or a startle. It was a slow, deliberate tilt of her head. Her eyes, the color of dark wet slate, lifted to meet his. There was no fear in them. There was no anger. There was nothing. It was a gaze of a scientist observing a specimen, a dispassionate analytical process of data acquisition. She was cataloging him. The elevated heart rate betrayed by the pulsing vein in his neck, the faint tremor in his hands from an overabundance of caffeine and adrenaline, the subtle insecurity masked by a facade of theatrical rage. To her, he was not a threat. He was a system on the verge of catastrophic failure. "Your volume is sufficient, Captain," she said. Her voice was quiet, level, and devoid of any inflection. It was like the synthesized voice of machines stating a fact. "Your proximity is unnecessary for communication." The clinical precision of her words, the utter lack of deference, sent a wave of shock through the room. Lieutenant Chun felt his jaw go slack. It was like watching someone calmly explain the principles of thermodynamics to a charging rhinoceros. Thorne's face flushed a deep mottled crimson. He was a man who understood only the language of force and hierarchy, and she was speaking in a dialect he could not comprehend. He interpreted her calmness as mockery, her precision as insolence. He straightened up, puffing out his chest. "Unnecessary? I'll tell you what's unnecessary. Your presence on my FOB is unnecessary. We are fighting a war here, not running a tech support helpline. You and your little clipboard are a liability." He turned to the room, projecting his voice for the benefit of his audience. "This is what happens when they send pencil pushers into the field. They think this is a game. They have no respect for the chain of command. He turned back to her, his finger jabbing at the empty space on her collar, where rank should have been. You have no rank. You have no unit. You have no authority here. As a commanding officer of this installation, I am officially revoking your operational access. I want you off my base. Now. Master Gunnery Sergeant Elias Vance, who had been quietly observing from a corner, now stirred. Vance was a man who seemed to be made of the same sun-baked earth as the base itself. His skin was leather, his face a roadmap of 100 forgotten conflicts. At 58, he was old for an active-duty Marine, but no one questioned his presence. He had seen colonels come and go like the seasons. He understood the difference between the noise of rank and the quiet weight of competence. He started to rise, a silent protest forming on his lips, but Sharma gave a minuscule, almost imperceptible shake of her head. It was a gesture so slight that only someone like Vance, a man trained to notice the subtlest of details, would have caught it. He hesitated, then settled back into his seat, his eyes narrowed, watching. Sharma rose from her chair. Her movement was economical, a single fluid motion without a single wasted calorie of energy. She stood to her full height, which still left her a head shorter than the captain. Even in her 60s, there was a coiled efficiency to her movements that spoke of decades of discipline. I acknowledge your order, Captain Thorne, she stated, her tone unchanging. It was not an admission of defeat. It was a simple confirmation that data had been received. Good, Thorne sneered, his victory assured. The supply gate is that way. Don't let it hit you on the way out. She turned and walked toward the exit of the mess tent. She did not hurry. She did not look back. Her steps were measured and silent, her back ramrod straight despite her age. She was a ghost departing, leaving behind only the lingering echo of her unnerving stillness. The Marines watched her go, a mixture of pity, confusion, and for a few, a faint flicker of respect mixed with bewilderment. An elderly woman, unceremoniously dismissed, walking into the brutal desert heat. Thorne stood tall, basking in the perceived triumph. He had faced down the anomaly, expelled the foreign body from his system, reasserted his dominance. He clapped his hands together. All right, back to it. Let's get some chow, he boomed, the performance resuming as if it had never stopped. Lieutenant Chen watched the tent flap fall shut behind her. A sense of profound unease settled in his stomach. He had witnessed a power play, but he was no longer sure who had actually won. He looked over at Master Gunnery Sergeant Vance. The old Marine's face was unreadable, but his eyes were fixed on the exit, and in their depths, Chen saw the calm, patient look of a man waiting for a storm he knew was coming. The expulsion felt wrong, like removing a critical, unknown component from a complex machine just to see what would happen. Minutes passed. The normal rhythm of the mess tent slowly returned, but it was a fragile thing. Thorne's laughter was a little too loud, the conversations a little too forced. The incident had left a crack in the foundation of the daily routine. It was exactly 7 minutes after Specialist Sharma had walked out into the oppressive, shimmering heat that the world ended. It did not begin with a bang. It began with a flicker. The humming fluorescent lights stuttered, died, then flared back to life at half their previous intensity, casting long, dancing shadows. A collective groan went through the tent as the air conditioning unit spun down, their reassuring drone replaced by an immediate, suffocating silence. The heat began to press in, a physical weight. Then came the alarms, not one, but a cascade of them, a dissonant symphony of failure. The piercing shriek of the perimeter breach alarm, the deep, guttural klaxon of generator failure, and the high-pitched, frantic beep of medical monitors from the adjacent aid station. Chaos erupted. Marines scrambled. Chairs were knocked over. Shouted questions filled the air. What's happening? Is it an attack? Get to your posts. Captain Thorne, his face a mass of confusion, bellowed for order. Communications. Give me a sitrep now. A young corporal at the comm station frantically tapped at his console, his face pale in the screen's dying glow. Sir, the system is down. All local comms are dead. I have no satellite link, no radio, nothing. The entire network just vanished. What do you mean, vanished? Thorne roared, storming over to the station. Reboot it. Get back online. I'm trying, sir. It's not responding. It's like the entire grid has been wiped clean. It's not just off, it's gone. From the aid station, a corpsman burst into the mess tent, his eyes wide with panic. "Sir, we have a major power failure. All ventilators and patient monitors are on battery, but they won't last long. We have 3 critical casualties from yesterday's IED blast. They will die without life support." Thorne spun around, his mind clearly struggling to process the simultaneous, multi-layered crisis. The by-the-book solutions that filled his training manuals were useless. There was no procedure for everything failing at once. He was a commander without eyes, without ears, without a voice. His authority, so absolute just moments before, was now a hollow title. He started shouting orders, but they were disjointed, contradictory. Get the backup generators online. Someone run a hard line to the aid station. Security teams to the perimeter. Full alert. A grizzled engineer, his face smeared with grease, ran in. "Captain, the backups are fried. We had a massive power surge just before the outage. It blew every primary and secondary breaker. The whole system is fused. It's not a reboot, sir. It's a complete teardown and rebuild." The report of a single gunshot cracked through the air from the direction of the south wall, sharp and definitive. It was followed by a ragged, uncontrolled burst of automatic fire. The perimeter breach alarm, which had been shrieking, suddenly fell silent. "What was that?" Thorne yelled, his voice now laced with frantic edge. "Who's firing?" "Report." But there could be no report. There were no comms. The base was blind, deaf, and dumb, and it was bleeding. The structured hierarchical system that Thorne commanded had dissolved into a panicked mob. His shouts were just more noise in the rising tide of chaos. He was a bug in the code, a system failure personified. Lieutenant Chun watched his commanding officer, the man who had seemed like a titan just minutes ago, completely unravel. His confidence was a cheap suit, and it was now in tatters, revealing the terrified, incompetent man beneath. It was then that Master Gunnery Sergeant Vance spoke, his voice not loud, but cutting to the panic with precision of a scalpel. He wasn't speaking to Thorne. He was speaking to Chun. "Lieutenant," he said, his voice calm and steady, "the captain just kicked our only solution out the gate." Chun stared at him, the implication dawning on him like a cold, horrifying sunrise. The system's analyst, the 65-year-old woman who understood the base not as a collection of people to be commanded, but as an interconnected network of systems. And they had just sent her walking into the desert. Outside the wire, Ana Sharma had not gone far. She had obeyed the captain's order to the letter, exiting through the supply gate, but she had not kept walking. She had stopped approximately 50 meters from the gate, alone, still figure in the vast, indifferent landscape of sand and rock. Despite the oppressive heat, she stood perfectly still, her breathing controlled, her posture erect. At 65, she had learned long ago how to conserve energy in hostile environments. She had felt the surge before the lights flickered. It was a subtle vibration through the soles of her boots, a change in the ambient electromagnetic field that she was uniquely attuned to after 4 decades of working with power systems. She did not need alarms to tell her the system had failed. She had run a full diagnostic in her head during her 2 days of quiet observation. She knew every vulnerability, every overtaxed circuit, every potential point of cascading failure. She had seen this coming, not the specifics, but the statistical probability. The system was fragile, managed by ego instead of logic. It was bound to break. She heard the alarms, the gunshots, the frantic, useless shouting. She turned her head and looked back at the base. It was a patient in cardiac arrest. Its central nervous system was offline. Its respiratory functions were failing, and hostile microbes were testing its compromised immune system. The order she had been given was to leave. But the situation had generated a new set of data, a new set of imperatives. Her core programming, forged in a past trauma she never spoke of, refined over 4 decades of service, was to correct system failures, to restore order, to impose competence on chaos. The captain's order was now irrelevant data, superseded by the overwhelming logic of the crisis. She moved. Her walk back toward the gate was not hurried. Despite her age, it was efficient, a deliberate, energy-conserving movement that betrayed no wasted motion. Years of discipline had taught her body to move with mechanical precision. The two young Marines at the gate, their faces etched with fear and confusion, raised their rifles as she approached. Both were barely 20, looking at this elderly woman in gray fatigues as if she were a mirage. "Ma'am, you can't come back in." The captain's orders. "Your perimeter alarm is down because the primary relay at Tower 3 is shorted out," she stated, her voice cutting through their panic. "The gunshot you heard was a single, precise shot that disabled the siren. The subsequent burst was panicked, unaimed fire. The threat is not a full assault. It is a single skilled infiltrator testing your response." She paused, her slate-gray eyes meeting theirs with unwavering certainty. "Your immediate priority is to re-establish a hardline communication loop between the gate and the command post. Give me your toolkit." She did not wait for an answer. She took the pouch of tools from the stunned Marine's belt and walked to the gate's control panel. The Marines watched mesmerized as her fingers, weathered but steady, flew across the wiring. She moved like a surgeon or a bomb disposal expert. There was no hesitation, no tremor despite her age. She stripped wires with her teeth, rerouted connections, bypassed a fried motherboard with a simple but ingenious series of physical connections. Her actions were a language they didn't speak, but they understood the grammar of pure, undiluted competence. Within 90 seconds, a small green light on the panel flickered to life. A crackle came from the hardline speaker. "This is Gate 1, she spoke into the receiver, her voice as calm as a frozen lake. "Who is on this net?" A frantic voice answered. "This is Corporal Davis at the command post." "Who is this? How are you talking?" "This is Specialist Sharma. I have established a temporary hardline. Report status of internal grid. It's a total failure. Everything is down. The aid station is on its last legs." "Acknowledge," she said. "Tell the engineer to meet me at the primary power conduit behind the mess tent. Tell him to bring a C-clamp and all the copper wiring he can carry. And tell your security team to stop firing blindly. They are wasting ammunition and giving away their positions. The threat is a probe, not an attack. They should hold their positions, stay silent, and observe." She handed the receiver back to the still stunned Marine. "Keep this channel open. Report only facts, no speculation." She then turned and broke into a steady, loping run toward the heart of the base. A gray wraith moving through the chaos she was already beginning to tame. For a woman of 65, her movement was remarkable. Not fast by the standards of the young Marines, but efficient, controlled, relentless. Inside the command post, which was just a section of the mess tent, Captain Thorne was still shouting. His orders had become increasingly desperate. "I need a runner to the aid station. Find out how much time they have left. I want a head count. Where's Sergeant Miller's squad?" Corporal Davis, the calm specialist, looked up from his newly active hardline speaker, his face a mixture of terror and awe. "Sir," he stammered, I have someone on the line." "Who?" Thorne demanded. "Is it battalion? Are they responding?" "No, sir. It's Specialist Sharma." Thorne stared at him, his mouth opening and closing silently. For a moment, his blustering facade completely crumbled, revealing raw, naked bewilderment. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost not only speak, but start issuing orders to fix the mess he'd made. Lieutenant Chun and Master Gunnery Sergeant Vance exchanged a look. Vance's expression was grim, but there was a spark of something else in his eyes, a fierce, profound vindication. He had seen this before, in other places, with other people. He recognized the archetype, the quiet professional, the hidden master, the person who doesn't talk about what they can do, but simply does it when required. Sharma did not run to the command post to seek permission. She ran directly to the aid station. She moved through the panicked, knots of Marines, like water flowing around rocks. Her mind was a schematic of the base, overlaid with real-time problem-solving algorithms. Problem 1, imminent loss of life. Solution, stabilized medical life support. She burst into the aid station. The scene was grim. The air was thick with the smell of antiseptic and blood. The head corpsman, a man named Petty Officer Reyes, was manually bagging a patient on a ventilator, his face slick with sweat, his movements frantic. The battery indicator on the main monitor was blinking a final, desperate red. "You have 60 seconds of power left," Sharma stated, not as a question, but as a fact. Reyes looked up, his eyes wild. "Who are you? We need power." "It's not coming," she said calmly. She surveyed the room, her eyes darting from machine to machine, cataloging, assessing. Her gaze fell on 2 heavy-duty portable radios and a vehicle battery sitting on a charging station, now inert. "Give me your defibrillator paddles and a saline drip bag." Reyes stared at her, as if she were insane. "What? For what?" "He's in respiratory arrest, not cardiac. The saline is for me. The paddles are for the ventilator," she replied, already moving. She grabbed the battery, hefted its considerable weight as if it were nothing. Adrenaline and 40 years of experience overriding the limitations of her aging body. She tore the end off a power cable with her hands, worked with a furious, focused intensity that was both terrifying and hypnotic. She was stripping wires, connecting terminals, using conductive saline to create a makeshift bridge, effectively hot wiring the ventilator directly to the truck battery. Sparks flew. The air smelled of ozone. For a heart-stopping moment, the machine went completely dark. Then, with a hum, its screen flickered back to life, its reading stabilizing. The rhythmic puff of the ventilator resumed its life-giving cadence. Reyes could only stare, his mouth agape. The entire procedure had taken less than 30 seconds. It was an act of battlefield engineering so audacious and brilliant that it bordered on witchcraft. "That battery will power the single ventilator for approximately 4 hours, Sharma said, wiping a smudge of grease from her weathered cheek. "Which of the other 2 patients is most critical?" She was already moving to the next bed, her mind already on the next impossible problem to solve. Meanwhile, the base engineer, a chief warrant officer named Peters, met her at the primary power conduit as instructed. He was a stout, perpetually grumpy man of 53 who had declared the situation hopeless. "It's no good," he said, gesturing at the blackened, melted tangle of metal. "The main breaker is a solid block of slag. We need a crane and a week to replace it." Sharma barely glanced at him. Her eyes were on the architecture of the power grid itself. "The failure is catastrophic, but the flow is simple physics," she said more to herself than to him. "We don't need the whole system. We need a single dedicated circuit from the tertiary generator to the aid station and the command post comms." "The tertiary generator?" Peters scoffed. "That's a museum piece. It hasn't been run in 5 years. The fuel lines are probably shot." "Then we will build a new fuel line," she stated. "See that refueling truck? Siphon its diesel. We will bypass the primary grid entirely and create a microgrid. Give me the copper wire and the C-clamp." For the next hour, Specialist Ana Sharma became a force of nature. She was not one person. She was an entire engineering corps. She directed the stunned but now obedient engineers and mechanics with concise, precise commands. There was no wasted motion, no superfluous word. She was the central processing unit of a broken machine, using the human beings around her as her limbs, her tools. She climbed the generator housing, her slight frame, diminished by age but propelled by will, moving with surprising agility. She jury-rigged a fuel line using a hose from the vehicle wash station. She used a C-clamp and a length of rebar to create a crude but effective manual bypass switch for the generator starter. Lieutenant Chun had left the command post, unable to bear Thorne's impotent rage any longer. He found himself drawn to the controlled, purposeful activity around the generator. He watched Sharma work, and he finally understood. She wasn't just an analyst. She was the system itself, a living embodiment of it. She saw the connections, the flows of energy and information, the weak points, and the potential bypasses. While Thorne had been trying to shout the hierarchy back into existence, she had been rebuilding it from the ground up based on the pure logic of necessity. With a deafening roar and a belch of black smoke, the tertiary generator coughed to life. A string of lights in the aid station and a single console in the command post flickered on. A ragged cheer went up from the small group of Marines who had gathered to watch the miracle unfold. Sharma slid down from the generator, landing with practiced ease despite her years. She ignored the cheers. Her work was not done. Problem 1, medical, and Problem 2, power, were stabilized. Now, problem 3, security. She walked to the south perimeter wall, the place where the shots had been fired. Master Gunnery Sergeant Vance was already there, his rifle held at low ready, his eyes scanning the twilight. He had organized a perimeter defense silently, using hand signals and runners, a ghost of the old ways before reliance on technology. He saw her approach and gave a curt nod. "Single infiltrator," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Cut the siren wire with a .308 round from that ridge over there, about 600 meters. Pro shot." The responding fire was panicked. "He's just testing us, seeing how we'd react to a poke in the eye." Sharma's eyes scanned the same ridge. "He will use the chaos of the power failure as cover. He will not try to breach the wall. He will use it as a distraction. The real target will be an intelligence asset." Her eyes flicked toward the small, windowless building that housed the base's secure server room. "He will assume the electronic locks are down with the power. He will be wrong." "How so?" Vance asked, a hint of curiosity in his voice. "The secure server room runs on a completely independent, closed power circuit with chemical batteries. It's designed to withstand a direct EMP strike. The outage will not have affected its security protocols," she explained. "He is walking into a trap." "A trap that no one knows is there," Vance countered. "Comms are still down. No one's watching the cameras for that building." "I am," she said simply. She didn't explain how. She didn't need to. Vance just accepted it. In his long career, he had learned that there were rare individuals who operated on a different plane, who saw the world in a way others could not. This quiet, 65-year-old woman was one of them. They waited. The desert night fell, swift and total. The stars emerged, cold and brilliant in the absence of the base's light pollution. The only sounds of the chug of the newly awakened generator and the whisper of the wind. Then a shadow detached itself from other shadows near the server building. It moved with fluid, predatory grace. The infiltrator. He reached the door, produced a small toolkit, and set to work on the electronic lock, confident that it was just a dead piece of metal. From the darkness beside Vance, Sharma spoke into a small handheld radio she had apparently salvaged and repaired. "Command post, this is Sharma. I have a visual on a hostile operative at the server facility. He is attempting to breach. On my mark, activate the building's external defense system." In the command post, Thorne, who had been sulking in the corner as his authority evaporated, looked up in confusion. "What defense system? That building doesn't have a defense system." Corporal Davis, now acting on Sharma's authority as if it were divine law, looked at the reactivated console. A new icon was blinking on the base schematic, an icon that had never been there before. It was labeled External Defense Grid, Server 1. "Sir, there's a command prompt here. It just says execute." "On my mark," Sharma's voice repeated calmly from the speaker. She watched the infiltrator's movements, his body language telling her he was seconds away from realizing his mistake. "Mark." Davis hit the button. Outside, high-intensity strobe lights and sonic emitters embedded in the walls of the server building erupted with blinding, disorienting force. The infiltrator cried out, stumbling back. His hands clapped over his eyes and ears, his senses completely overloaded. From concealed ports, a thick, viscous foam shot out, covering him, hardening almost instantly, immobilizing him completely. It was a non-lethal takedown system, brutally effective. The trap was sprung. The threat was neutralized. Silence returned to the desert, deeper and more profound than before. The crisis was over. All three cascading failures, medical, power, and security, had been contained, controlled, and corrected. It was at that moment that a new sound began to intrude, a rhythmic, powerful chopping that grew steadily louder. All eyes turned to the sky. Two black shapes materialized out of the night, sleek and predatory. MH-60 Blackhawks, unmarked, flying without lights. They weren't from the regional command. They were something else entirely. They swept over the base once. Then one of them descended, its rotor wash kicking up a blinding storm of dust, and settled onto the landing pad with practiced ease. The ramp dropped, and a figure emerged, silhouetted against the dim interior light. He was a tall man in a flight suit, his face etched with authority. He wore the 2 stars of a rear admiral on his collar. He was followed by a team of SEALs, their gear bristling with the quiet menace of elite operators. The admiral strode directly into command post, his eyes sweeping the scene of barely controlled chaos, the jury-rigged power, the pale, exhausted faces of Marines. His gaze fell on Captain Thorne, who had managed to pull himself together enough to stand and offer a shaky salute. "Captain," the admiral said, his voice cold as deep space. "Report what in God's name happened here." And so began the reckoning. The debriefing was held right there in the makeshift command post, under the glare of a single generator-powered bulb. Captain Thorne, seeing a chance to reclaim his narrative and his authority, launched into a self-aggrandizing, carefully constructed fiction. "Admiral, we were hit by a sophisticated, coordinated cyber and physical attack," he began, his voice regaining its familiar booming confidence. "They took down our grid and sent a saboteur to exploit the chaos. It was a tough situation, but my men and I responded admirably. I personally directed the effort to restore critical power to the aid station and led the team that neutralized a hostile operative. We were in a bad spot, but Marine training and grit saw us through." He painted a picture of himself as a heroic commander, holding the line against overwhelming odds. He conveniently omitted any mention of Specialist Sharma in his version of events. She did not exist. Lieutenant Chin stood in the back, his stomach churning with disgust. He looked at Master Gunnery Sergeant Vance, whose face was a mask of stone. The Admiral listened to the entire performance without interruption, his expression unreadable. When Thorne had finished his tale of heroism, the Admiral was silent for a long moment. Then he turned his head slightly. "Specialist Sharma," he said, "you were here for the duration of the event. Does Captain Thorne's report align with your data?" From the shadows near the entrance, Sharma stepped forward. She held a small, ruggedized tablet, one that Chin had not seen before. It was her own personal equipment. Its screen cast a pale, clinical light on her weathered face. "No, Admiral," she said, her voice a quiet counterpoint to Thorne's bombast. "It does not." Thorne sputtered, his face turning red. "With all due respect, Admiral, this specialist is just a civilian analyst. She wouldn't know." "Captain," the Admiral cut him off, his voice like cracking ice. "Be silent." He turned his full attention to Sharma. "Present your data, Specialist." "Acknowledge," she said. The event was not a coordinated external attack. It was a cascading failure originating from a single, poorly maintained power regulator. Its failure was predicted in my preliminary diagnostic report, which I submitted yesterday at 1,600 hours, and was marked as unread by Captain Thorne's command. She tapped the screen. A technical diagram of the base's power grid appeared, a single component blinking red. A time-stamped log of her report appeared beside it. Thorne's jaw tightened. "That's a lie. I never saw any such report. The system logs are immutable," Sharma stated without emotion. "At the onset of the failure, command and control collapsed. My analysis of the command post audio logs, which are automatically buffered and stored locally, indicates that for a period of 11 minutes, the commanding officer issued no actionable orders. Instead, the logs show 37 instances of raised vocal volume for non-communicative purposes and 4 direct contradictions of subordinate recommendations." She tapped the screen again. An audio waveform appeared, with time-stamped transcriptions of Thorne's panicked, useless shouts. The clinical black and white text was a brutal indictment. Chun could feel the air being sucked out of the room. Power to the aid station was not restored by the captain's command. Sharma continued, her voice relentless in its placid neutrality. It was restored by a non-standard bypass of the ventilator's power supply using a vehicle battery, a procedure I executed at 1927 hours. Tertiary grid power was restored at 2014 hours by bypassing the fused primary breaker and creating a microgrid, a solution I designed and implemented with the assistance of Chief Warrant Officer Peters. The hostile operative was not neutralized by a team led by the captain. He was incapacitated by a non-lethal defense system integrated into the server facility, a system I activated remotely at 2103 hours after tracking the operative's movements. She swiped the screen one last time. It now showed a split-screen view. On one side was the security footage from the server building, showing the lone operative being neutralized. On the other was a thermal image from a micro-drone she had apparently deployed, showing Captain Thorne standing inside the command post, shouting at a corporal at the exact moment he claimed to be leading the takedown. The data was absolute. It was irrefutable. It was a clinical, methodical vivisection of one man's ego and incompetence. There was no room for argument, no space for interpretation. He was broken. Captain Marcus Thorne stood frozen, his face ashen. The roaring bonfire was extinguished, leaving behind nothing but cold, gray ash. He looked around the room at the faces of the men he commanded and saw not respect or fear, but contempt and pity. He had been exposed, his authority revealed as nothing more than a costume. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The man who had built his entire world on the power of his own voice was rendered utterly, totally silent. The Admiral looked at Thorne for a long, heavy moment. "Captain," he said, his voice low and final, "you are relieved of command. Master Gunnery Sergeant Vance, you will assume temporary command of this FOB until replacement arrives. See to it that Mr. Thorne is confined to his quarters. He will be on the first transport out of here at 0600. His career is over." Vance nodded, a grim satisfaction in his eyes. Two large Marines, who minutes ago had been part of Thorne's audience, stepped forward and escorted the now limp figure of the former captain out of the tent. The correction was complete. The bug had been removed from the code. The Admiral then turned to face Sharma. He looked at the quiet, unassuming woman in the plain gray fatigues, a woman of 65 who had just orchestrated the salvation of an entire forward operating base. He saw not a specialist or an analyst. He saw a scalpel, a precision instrument of immense and terrifying capability. His entire demeanor changed. The cold anger was replaced by deep, profound respect. "Ah, they told me you were the best," the Admiral said, his voice now quiet, reverent. "They told me you were a ghost, a legend they whisper about at Fort Meade and Dam Neck. They didn't do you justice." He paused, his eyes taking in the jury-rigged power, the stabilized systems, the quiet order that had been imposed upon lethal chaos. "Your designation is Systemic Correction Unit 7. Your operational mandate is to identify and correct critical failures. Is that correct?" "That is correct, Admiral," Sharma replied. "You were ordered to leave this base by the commanding officer. A direct order. You disobeyed it." "The order was based on incomplete data," she stated. "The emergence of new, overriding mission-critical imperatives rendered the previous order obsolete. My actions were a logical application of my core operational mandate." The Admiral stared at her, a slow smile spreading across his face. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated professional admiration. He understood. She wasn't a soldier who followed orders. She was a fundamental force of nature that followed logic. You didn't command her. You aimed her. He drew himself up to his full height. In a gesture that stunned every Marine in the room, Rear Admiral Thomas Caldwell, a man who commanded fleets and had the ear of senators, rendered a slow, formal salute to the small, 65-year-old woman with no rank on her collar. "Thank you for your service, Specialist," he said. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of the entire institution. Sharma met his gaze and returned the gesture with a nod that was both an acknowledgement and a dismissal. Her work here was done. The system was stable. Master Gunnery Sergeant Vance, his face carved from granite, snapped to attention and rendered his own salute. Lieutenant Chun, his illusions shattered and his education truly begun, did the same, his salute sharp and filled with newfound understanding. One by one, every Marine in the tent, from the grease-stained engineer to the battle-hardened grunt, turned to face her and saluted. It was a spontaneous, unanimous wave of respect. They weren't saluting a rank or a title. They were saluting competence. They were saluting the quiet, undeniable truth that had been demonstrated before their very eyes. They were saluting the still, silent center around which their chaotic world had been forced to realign itself into order. Her legend was born in that moment, in the dust and diesel fumes of a forgotten outpost. The story of the quiet 65-year-old analyst who was kicked out of a base, only to return minutes later as its savior. A story that would be told in hushed, reverent tones for years to come. In a world that often mistakes volume for value and confidence for competence, The story of Specialist Ana Sharma reminds us of several profound truths. Subscribe to USX Stories for more tales of quiet heroes, unsung professionals, and the people who prove that true strength doesn't need to announce itself.